Pinkerton's Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre-Terre. It is not intended for children.
Before I continue, I do feel the need to emphasize what I'm sure the people reading this will be thinking. The length of this account. Each is roughly 3 to 4 times the length of the average Paranormal Pinkerton report. It goes without saying that the death of a control, in this manner at least, is a rather momentous occasion in the history of the Paranormal Pinkerton organization. New members often overestimate the actual danger control is in. They see the danger they have to endure on a weekly, daily basis, and naturally translate that to believe that the more important you are, the more dangerous your work. That could not be further from the truth. Control is guarded zealously, faceless and nameless by design to prevent being targeted. There is no safer position than control. They have died prematurely before, of sickness, of old age, other unrelated matters. But to be killed in the presence of a detective on a mission is so unheard of that I could not find any account of such a thing in any of our records. I do not expect the detectives to have a great deal of faith in me for my actions preceding taking the position, but it is my hope that I can at least be transparent. That being said, we found Liam still alive, right where I had left him. He had the presence of mind to apply a tourniquet to his leg with a bandana. Hawk, unfazed by the idea of getting blood on himself and stronger than he looked, carried Liam in a fireman's carry as we headed to the house. When he saw us first come up to him, he regarded us with only a vague nod of his head and acquiesced to being lifted with nothing but a faint grumble. I was not sure how much of this near catatonic state he was in was due to blood loss, or how much from mental trauma. It did not really seem to matter either. After a long period of silent, thought-filled walking, I raised Hawk's cell phone triumphantly. "Reception," I announced. Liam's phone started buzzing. Liam fumbled with it, fingers slow and sluggish before he managed to look at his text messages. When he lowered the phone from his eyes, he looked horrified. "Hey, what's wrong?" I asked. I fought the urge to cringe as I said it. I did not need to see Hawk's sleep-puffed eyes to know he rolled them, before Liam answered. "Shannon is in labor," he said. "The messages are from her, asking where the hell I've been." I did not know what to say. We continued on the path. The house was fast approaching, a rather large mansion with a gray stone and brick facade. The moment we all reached the porch, Hawk patted Liam on the back as he put the larger man onto the steps. "Coast seems clear," he said. "I've got to record this and start making calls. I'll get an ambulance once I clear the house. You still got blood in you." He looked at me. The look was clear, a don't do anything crazy look, and for as irrational as I had proven to be with my insane plans as of late, I still managed to muster up a feeling of indignance. What did he think I was going to do? I sat on the porch steps with my hands folded in my lap, posture straight as I waited with Liam. He was texting on his phone, but, strangely enough, did not seem to actually be pressing send. Suddenly, he drew the phone away from him. "Are you okay?" I asked. Liam pressed his head against his knees, his fingers fisted in his hair. "God!" he choked out. "She's in labor. I can't tell her when she's in labor. But then what about when she's out? What am I supposed to say?" I stood. I walked to where the cell phone had landed and crouched to pick it up. I wiped some blood from its screen. "Well, it would be easy enough to say it was a wild animal," I said. Holding the phone up, I turned it to inspect it for damage. "The organization I work for has protocols to cover up these sorts of accidents. You think I care about that right now?" he asked, looking upward. "That's not what I mean. It's still working." I walked back over, sat down, and held the cell phone back out to him. Breaking that won't help anything. Liam stared at me before finally, tentatively, reaching for the cell phone. Do you even care? You're acting like nothing happened. He sounded as though he had been betrayed. And in a way, I suppose he had been. The girl that he had flirted with in a bar and invited to go hunting with him was far different than the one talking to him now. I think I responded with the appropriate amount of emotion at the time, I answered. But I'd like to give you the room you need without burdening you with my own emotions. That's a very careful way of saying you don't. Well, what was I to say? I was stuck, conflicted. Guilt over my inability to do anything to save Killian. Obligation to my role, my duties. The fact that control could not be too emotional. If I were to allow myself to bask in the horrific aftermath of events described so often in case files, I would have lost my sanity long ago. My mother had gone to great lengths to instill resilience within me. The fact I did not have it was what had led me here to begin with. But I was not reading some bloody case file. It had happened in front of me, and he was in front of me. Sighing, I scrubbed the hand down my face. I'm sorry, I said. My father died too, if that is any consolation. Is he one of you guys? You mean a Paranormal Pinkerton? Whatever that is. Sure. Yes. How did he die? I don't know, I answered. Liam, taken aback, shifted uncomfortably on his seat. I suppose he continued asking questions because it was something to think about besides his current predicament. How can you not know? Would they just not tell you? Oh, they could tell me, I said. I shrugged. I don't want to know. The look Liam gave me, that dumbfounded, horrified look, made me raise an eyebrow. You saw what happened to your father. I was afraid of what they'd say. Liam didn't have an answer for that. Before I could say anything else, the door opened again, and Hawk came out. Control is on her way, he told me. In the meantime, I'm not to let you out of my sight. I can accept those terms. May I call her now? Sure. As for you, Hawk looked at Liam. I still have some questions. Mind if we chat a bit? Not for long, Liam said numbly. I have to get to the hospital. My sister is going to need me there. I did not stay to eavesdrop. The contents of the phone call with my mother are irrelevant to the rest of this account. Although I am sure those who feel less favorable to me would want me to recount what was said in every detail. But those people can rest assured that it was castigating. When she had gone through questioning whether the stress of our work had driven me mad, or if she had merely underestimated the depths of my own stupidity, I thanked her and hung up. True to his promise of not letting me out of his sight, Hawk made me come with him to wait at the hospital. There were a lot of loose ends that needed tying. It was not right to wipe our hands clean and leave Liam to deal with all the emotional fallout of this family tragedy. Though I always found his statement, "I don't like hospitals," to be rather trite, as opposed to one's normal love of having to go to the hospital. I do admit I understand what drives such sentiment. After spending so much time in the wilderness, going to a place that felt so sterile, so clinical, was somehow both familiar and unnerving. It also only further served to highlight how out of place Hawk looked. We got stopped and the nurse asked if he was looking for the urgent care clinic. They probably thought he was homeless, by the state of his disheveled clothing and hair, as well as the flask that he had gripped in his hand. "No, I'm here to visit someone," he answered. He uncapped the flask, lifted his head, and when he lowered it, he frowned. "Do you leave coffee out in the waiting room?" "Well, yes," the nurse started, and Hawk immediately walked in the direction he was pointing, scratching at his 5 o'clock shadow. "I'm sorry, my brother-in-law hasn't been able to sleep. He's been so worried about the baby," Liam said quickly before following us. Brother-in-law? I whispered. Well, I'm not going to explain how I actually know him. What about the father? He's still in South Africa, Leon explained. Sandaf. Military. The waiting room was typical. Beige. Uncomfortable plastic chairs and a smattering of old magazines scattered about the place from people too lazy to put them back when they were called. Liam went to talk to the nurse, and I made my way toward Hawk, who was refilling his flask. Why don't you just drink it out of the cups they provide? I asked. If Hawk had paid attention to my question, he did not deem it worthy of an answer. You don't know ABC, do you? He asked after he had stoppered his flask. Always be caffeinated? No. He turned, poking a finger against my collarbone. Always bring contingencies. That was your problem. There's nothing more unpredictable in this job than LaFay. You need backup plans for your backup plans. I would have thought the heir would know about doing her research. I pushed Hawk's wrist and guided it away from me. My mother already took the time to explain my inadequacies. Thank you. I'm just saying, if this is something you want to do, who said I wanted to be a field agent? For a moment, Hawk blinked, staring at me incredulously. Well then, what the hell was all of this for? Because... I stopped. I crossed my arms. I was tired of feeling like it was hopeless, because that was what it came down to, was it not? I could not understand how my mother did it. Day in and day out, reading reports of all the ways people died and we had failed. No one wanted to dwell on the lives lost after Beowulf slew the dragon. At best we controlled the damage, but damage was always done. Hawk did not answer right away. I do not know what his answer would have been. Liam's voice cut through our brief conversation as he called out, Guys, he said. The doctor is here. We looked back. An older man with glasses and a receding hairline was looking at us. I turned my back on Hawk and followed them. The baby is already here? The doctor had wasted no time in giving the news the moment the three of us had stepped into the hallway. Liam raked a hand through his hair, staring down at the floor as he tried to process the news. She just went into labor a few hours ago. It's called a precipitous labor, the doctor explained gently. It's not extremely common, but certainly not unheard of. She was already close to giving birth by the time she made it to the hospital. He looked at Hawk. You must be Arno? I'm sorry. I know it must be distressing to know you missed your child's birth. Hawk stared at him. Yes, I'm Arno, he said. How was Sharon? The doctor looked confused for a moment, and I grabbed his arm, digging my nails into it. My brother has been absolutely exhausted trying to get here, I explained. How is Shannon? The doctor still looked confused. Thankfully, Liam did a good job appearing unfazed, which seemed to do enough to placate him. She and the baby are doing well. There can be complications when labor goes as quickly, but so far things seem to have gone smoothly. She said it would be alright to permit visitors, but be aware she'll be quite exhausted. If she seems a bit out of it, don't be alarmed. Very normal. We were finally led into the room. The McCarthy family had a remarkably strong family resemblance. Shannon McCarthy was no exception. She had the same red hair as her father and brother, the same high cheekbones. A few wisps of hair were stuck to her forehead, slicked with sweat presumably from the strain of labor, and she held a bundle so thickly wrapped in her arms that it was difficult to see any of the child within it. She looked up. Liam, she greeted. She looked exhausted, but she was grinning. She looked like she was about to say something else. When she saw that there were strangers in the room, she frowned. Who are they? Liam stepped forward. Shan, he choked out. Is something the matter? Where is Dad? For a moment, Liam did not answer. He swallowed down tears as he stepped forward and awkwardly tried to hug his sister while he was holding her child. I don't know how to say this. Dad is dead. He explained the situation. Shannon, for her part, was too exhausted and in shock to say much of anything. If not for the fact that she started to tear up, I almost feared that he was not registering anything he was saying. When he was finished, he looked at both of us for a long time before saying anything. She took a deep breath first. "Thank you for helping my brother," she said, voice cracking. Hawk took another drink. "We're sorry. Wish we could have helped your father, too. As horrible as this sounds, I was afraid something like this would happen. And I'm just glad Liam wasn't hurt than he already is." "Can," Liam started to say. "I'm just being honest, Liam. I've been telling you both since day one that we should have been leaving those things alone. They were too smart. Felt wrong to kill them. But he couldn't leave well enough alone, and now..." Her voice had started to rise in volume. She looked back down at her child, who had opened their eyes. Chin swallowed. "I'm sorry. This isn't the right time for this," she acquiesced. "Do you want to look at him?" Liam forced himself to smile. "Oh man. A boy, huh? You and Arno ever decide on a name?" "To be honest," she bit her lip as she handed him over to her brother. "We had some in mind, but now I'm thinking maybe naming him after Dad. I'll explain to Arno as soon as I can get a hold of him. I'm sure he won't say no." It would probably be redundant to describe a newborn baby as cute, but there really is not much else that could have been said. The baby was very, very tiny, and had carried on the McCarthy signature with his head of very sparse, wispy red hair. Liam almost collapsed in the chair holding him, and the child immediately grabbed at Liam's thumb and started pressing it between his gums. "Not a bad idea," he said, looking down at his nephew, Killian Jr. CJ for short. "Has a nice ring to it, right?" Shannon agreed. I looked at Hawk. "Well, now that this is all settled, shouldn't we... go?" "Go? Well, we can provide them with the appropriate resources, but to my understanding they have a great deal of their own. You don't get it, do you?" Hawk grabbed the chair that was on the opposite side of Shannon's hospital bed. He dragged it to our side of the room, flipped it around, and rested his chin on his knuckles, with the headrest under his palms. "I'm not going anywhere." Liam looked at him incredulously. "Listen, if it's about that rift thing or whatever, you can have free rein to figure out where it is and shut it, I don't care," he said. "But, no offense, I would rather just never see your faces again at this point, as grateful as I am for your help. Believe me, we're not getting mixed up in this again." "Personally, I wasn't even planning on staying here," Shannon added. "I only came to the hospital so I wouldn't be alone during the birth. It went by so fast I can move around. They might even let me go home. Well, I don't know if I want to go back to the house. Yeah, screw family legacies or whatever. I'd rather just sell the property altogether and wipe my hands of it." The two siblings nodded at each other in solidarity. Hawk wiped coffee from his mouth on the back of his hand. "You three really know nothing about the Fae, do you?" he asked, including me in his gaze. "Why do you think Control assigned me to this mission? Fae creatures are my area of expertise. They are the pettiest things next to human beings I've ever encountered. You think they considered that a fair trade?" Liam's face paled. "What do you mean?" "I know for a fact you did not just kill that one satyr," Hawk said, crossing his arms and nodding at Liam. "Fairies take eye for an eye, literally. They only killed one of you. It's not equal." He lifted one hand and pointed to me lackadaisically. "You. Air. You have to know a lot about this sort of thing, don't you? You're telling me you don't see the writing on the wall?" Of course I did. From an early age, I was studying supernatural phenomena the way a child might learn basic arithmetic or phonics. My eyes crossed over from CJ to Shannon. I remembered my encounter with the satyr. What had Liam said? That they were always drawn to her? "A changeling," I said. I steepled my hand, extending my pointer fingers and pressing them against my lips as I thought about it. "I don't mean to alarm either of you, but it's highly probable that your baby is going to be targeted." "My baby?" "Very common thing," Hawk explained. "Fairies capture newborns and replace them with changelings. Sometimes for servants, sometimes for human sacrifices. Mostly human sacrifices. Stop! Liam stood, handing CJ back the cannon and putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. Do you have to hammer the point home? I'm pretty aware of how dangerous they are. But they can't get to the hospital, right? They never left the forest. The Sayers, yes, I said. But that doesn't rule out something else. Something a little stronger that can travel further from the rift. She's right, Hawk agreed. If I were you, I'd get the hell out of Dodge. We will, Cannon agreed. I'll stay in a hotel with the baby until we can get a ticket back home. I'm going back to South Africa. And Liam, you better be on the flight with me. You make it sound like I wouldn't be, he answered. I'm out of here. Screw this. Hawk rubbed a hand down his face. What a mess, he mumbled to himself. His phone vibrated. He grabbed it and looked down at the caller ID. He looked at me. Your mother, he stated. I'd go down to the lobby if I were you. I am a bit ashamed to admit this. But my face paled. Alright. When I opened the door, I looked back at them. I raised my hand awkwardly and waved. I was not sure of what else I should be doing. Ken copied me. Liam stared out the window. When I saw her again, I was most struck by how old Mother looked. She had always had a rather odd, almost paradoxical appearance. I'm sure I do not need to elaborate greatly to whomever listening that it was strange to see such silver hair accompanying a youthful face. But there were a few more lines around her eyes than I recalled, a darkness in the hollows of her cheekbones. And when had her face become that gaunt? I did not know if I had really scared her that badly, or if it was because I realized with some shock that this had been the longest I had ever been away from her. She did not say a single word to me when we encountered one another in the lobby. Everything she had to say had already been expressed over the phone. I always appreciated it about my mother. She was not the sort to say something more than once, to harp on something after she had made her feelings clear on the matter. She knew she did not need to. No, instead she hugged me and asked where she could find Hawk. By the time we had entered the room again, Liam had handed CJ back to his sister, and he was making a face as he looked down at the flask he held in his hand. Bit on the black side, isn't it? He said. Helps keep you awake, Hawk answered. Ever try a Red Bull? All that sugar? Terrible for you. Shannon looked somewhat annoyed by this, focusing instead on bouncing her child in her arms before she heard the door open. On behalf of the Paranormal Pinkerton Organization, let me express my deepest apologies for the ordeal your family has been through, my mother said as she stood in the doorway. She crossed her hands crisply behind her back, nodding to Hawk. Ryan? Control? He stood, holding up his hand. Liam tossed the flask back. He looked at it, wiped the rim, and then held it out to my mother. Coffee? No, thank you. She carried with her a large messenger bag. Reaching into it, she pulled out a red folder. We don't have a lot of time before visiting hours are over, I'm afraid, so we must make this as fast as possible. Mr. McCarthy, I'm sure your sister is not in a proper headspace at the moment, all things considered. So if you both don't mind, I'd like to go over this with you. Liam looked confused. You can trust her, Hawk assured him. She's the one that sent me here in the first place. And did not send her, to be clear, she added. Shannon looked at me. I wasn't there, but from what my brother told me, she said, carefully, I don't think her being there changed anything. That is, Dad was playing with fire for a while before she ever showed up. He was going hunting that day with or without her. I'm just glad you weren't hurt. I swallowed. It was not in my best interest to thank her at that moment with my mother standing right next to me. So I stayed silent. Be that as it may, she still should not have been there. Mother looked at me. Stay here. You have my number. If you see anything suspicious, contact me immediately. Okay? She handed me a cell phone. It was a bulky thing. There were contacts already loaded into it, including Mother, Coffee Flask, and others, each codenamed. I could tell who most of them were, even their area of operations. I was surprised at what I knew at a glance. "You're just going to be outside, aren't you?" She stared at me. I sighed. "Yes, Mother, I will." When they left, I was in the rather awkward position of being alone in the room with the member of the McCarthy family I was least familiar with. "Are you alright?" Shannon asked me, perhaps feeling similarly to how I was. All things considered, I mean. I was still standing near the door. Sure. But I think I should be asking you that question. And in an attempt to, at least, make an effort to be personable, I made my way toward the chair near the bed. "Thank you for what you said. Well, you weren't there, but I appreciate it all the same." "Well, what I said was true. I figured it was only a matter of time before something like that happened anyway." I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "Your brother had mentioned that the satyrs liked you. That they'd walk up to you." "They did," she said. "I thought they were cute in an ugly sort of way. I never liked hunting as much as my dad or Liam did. Especially not when they looked that humanoid. Liam thought it was because they liked girls, but the one I found attacked me immediately," I said. Shannon shrugged. "I don't know. Now that you've explained to me what they might try to do," her face took on an ashen complexion. "Maybe they didn't want to hurt my baby." I thought back to my encounter with that first satyr, how it had pressed its cold snout into my stomach. "Maybe," I agreed. "That's certainly possible." Shannon bit her lip. "I would hear this music, too, sometimes," she said. "The first few times, when I pointed out, Dad and Liam said I was hearing things." Was I hearing things? Now this, I could do. It was almost comfortable for me. Dealing with victims was not an area of expertise, but explaining the near encyclopedic knowledge of supernatural phenomenon was. The music. Well, the Fae will try and use different methods to attract their victims. Sometimes they offer food, or favors, anything to lure someone closer to them. From what you've told me, they probably thought you'd be more driven by curiosity than material gain. As for why no one else heard it, it could have been on purpose, so that you would be alone when you followed it. People of Irish heritage tend to be more attuned to the supernatural, due to the disproportionate appearance of Fae sightings on the island. But the degree to which one can see through the veil varies from person to person. You may just be more sensitive than the rest of your family. I trailed off. I could tell that Shannon had stopped paying attention to me in any meaningful way whatsoever. She was gently rocking her baby back and forth in her arms. I was about to apologize for boring her, to ask her if she had had her question answered. But before I could, "It wasn't my fault, was it?" Shannon blurted out. Her head had snapped up then, staring at me with wide eyes that shone with tears. I was too surprised to answer at first. So Shannon amended. "Liam said they had made a bow, with the fishing line. I let them take it. I thought I was just having a laugh, but stop." My hands had clenched in the fist then, and I pressed them hard into my thighs. "The organization I'm part of is supposed to keep people safe from creatures like that," I said softly. "Whether you all antagonize them doesn't matter. What you did doesn't matter, even if it couldn't have possibly been your fault anyway. None of you could have known what you were dealing with." I was staring down at the floor. I could not force myself to look Shannon in the face, but I went there to take responsibility. I should have known better. I should have been able to do more. Should have warned them instead of lying about why I was there. If I had, maybe they would have never gone out that night to begin with. Maybe they would have just thought it was crazy. I lifted my head just a fraction. I've been accused by your brother of not seeming like I care all that much, but I swear, I will regret what happened to your father for the rest of my life. And I am sorry. Shannon didn't answer at first. I was afraid I had said something wrong. When she finally sighed, shoulders slumping, she announced, I'm hungry. My brow furrowed. I suppose she was, more than understandably, too overwhelmed to continue the conversation. Oh, do you, want me to get you anything? No, I need to call my husband anyway. And I know where the vending machine is, she answered. She looked down at CJ. Would you mind... Me? Oh, I don't know. Just for a second? So I can get up. I nodded. She handed the child to me, and as I carefully positioned him into the nest I had made with my arms, Shannon pushed herself off of the bed. She took him back. There was a medical bassinet, what looked like a very clinically steel chest of drawers with a basket for the child sitting on top. She placed CJ inside, and took her cell phone from the bedside table. I'll be right back. I do not have a lot of experience with children. Vaguely, I was aware that I would need to have them eventually, or one at least, given my position and the need to produce an heir of my own. The possibility no longer feels far off to me, but then again, ideas like marriage or children were either entirely remote or only couched in the most practical, clinical of feelings. Most things were. I have now seen what getting personal in a case can do. The child that I was watching over would grow up never knowing his namesake. I felt something hit the back of my head and I startled, turning and looking down at where it fell on the floor. Fruit snacks? Sorry. Shannon sat down on the edge of her bed again. In her hand, she was holding a package of fruit snacks. I warned you, but I guess you didn't hear me. I thought you might want something. She ripped open the package, and I did the same. It did not occur to me until that moment how absolutely starving I was. By the time my mother had returned, I was pouring the last of the bag's contents above my head into my waiting mouth. Hungry? Oh. Mom. Do you want any? There were just a few pieces lingering in the bottom of the bag. She reached in and pulled out a single one. McCarthy tells me you fired a gun at them, she stated. Yes, a rifle. Your shoulder? I moved it and winced. Fine. Hawk relocated it. Where are they? The shock of the whole ordeal seemed to make him forget about his own injury, she explained. So I asked Hawk to take William to get some medical attention of his own. My brother was hurt? Just his leg, she assured her. He will be fine. Mother looked at me again. I want to get you a gun when we return home. You should have learned how to use one by now anyway. I nodded. Okay. My mother didn't eat the fruit snack right away. She examined it first, turning it to look from different angles as she pinched it between thumb and pointer finger. She had always been cautious that way. When she seemed satisfied and ate it, she added, I was also made aware of the fact that you forced Liam to run, rather than trying to help Killian. I looked down at the floor and nodded. I felt her hand rest against my shoulder. You made the right decision. You saved both your lives. No mission is a complete failure if you manage to survive. Mostly. A tactical retreat means that a better strategy can be used next time. Her tone was not warm, nor comforting. It was no surprise that she was the woman that raised me, but I recognized her words for what they were, an olive branch. I put my hand on hers and squeezed gently, but with someone in the room with us, I felt it appropriate to wait before accepting what she had offered. Shannon, did you manage to talk to your husband? I asked, looking back at her. For some reason, she looked surprised. Oh, yes. He approved of the name, thankfully. And of course he's very upset about the news. I told him it was a wild animal. For the best, my mother agreed. The less he knows, the better for his own safety. As soon as Agent Hawk returns, my daughter and I will be leaving. You can make sure you're safe until you return to your country. If funds for a hotel are an issue, thank you for the offer. But actually, I think once I'm allowed to leave, I'll be staying at the house. Staying at the house? Hawk had opened the door. He closed it, the door clicking softly behind him. What the hell do you mean? What happened to getting out of Dodge? I thought about it, Ken said calmly. She got up, walking to the bassinet and taking CJ in her arms. Surely, for just a few nights it would be fine, as long as I don't let the baby out of my... What happened next was so sudden that it made me slap my hand over my mouth in shock. Hawk had taken out his pistol. He'd actually taken out his gun and pointed it at Shannon. Hawk! I hissed, not wanting to attract the attention of any doctors or security. What are you doing? Where did she get the food? Hawk asked. What? The vending machine down the hall, I answered. So she left the room. Did you go with her? No, I stayed to watch the child. I thought that was what I was supposed to do. How long was she out of the room? A few minutes? Hawk glanced sideways at my mother. She was out of her sight, he said. It wouldn't have been that hard to take her. Take her? Here? I said. We said it before, some of the Fae are made of stronger stuff. Wouldn't be impossible. Shannon, hand the baby to the air until we get this sorted out. Shannon looked horrified. I'm not giving anyone my baby, she said. She pressed CJ protectively against her chest. You're scaring me. My heart was starting to beat against my chest. Mom? We can't leave until we get this sorted out, Hawk insisted. But before he could say anything else, Mother held up her hand. Agent Hawk, calm down, she said. If you scare her any more than she already is, she'll call security. You're right, I will, Shannon snapped. Hawk started to lower his weapon, very reluctantly. But I came prepared for something like this. From her bag, Mother produced a small bottle. It was green plastic, slightly translucent, so it was possible to make out the oblong pills that were inside. Emblazoned on the label were the words, Nature's Treasure Iron Supplements. Iron, I said. I recognized what she was planning immediately. Iron was to the Fae what silver was for werewolves. Poison. Mother walked forward, holding out the bottle. Iron supplements. I'm sure you're quite familiar with them. They're prescribed to prevent anemia in pregnant women, so they're entirely safe. She shook the bottle before uncapping it and tearing off the seal. And as you can see, it hasn't been tampered with, and this is not an unmarked bottle. There's absolutely no reason for you to refuse to take 2 65mg tablets. She poured 2 green pills into her hand. Take them, and this can all be quickly resolved. For a moment, Shannon didn't say anything. Finally, she held out her hand. Fine, give them to me. Anything to get this over with. No, I'm feeding them to you, she answered. Why? The same reason why you look like Shannon McCarthy right now, she replied calmly. If you aren't her, then you can make us see things that aren't real. I would have to be very foolish to trust you. I did not time exactly how long the two women stared at each other. It felt like a long time, like hours, even if logically that couldn't have been the case. Finally, after far too long, Shannon rolled her eyes. I should have known you people would be a little smarter than the average mortal, she sighed. Her voice was crystal clear. The sigh was heartbreaking. My blood ran cold. I wanted to move away from her, but I also could not ignore the fact that she was holding CJ. I started, slowly, to walk toward her. Give me the baby, I stated. Hawk raised his pistol again. Shannon, the Fae that looked like Shannon, looked remarkably poised in spite of the situation she was in. Why are you all looking at me like I'm some sort of wild animal? I'm not like those satyrs. Even I find them annoying. They're good for grunt work and not much else when all is said and done. I like to think of myself as a bit more reasonable. And who exactly are you? Hawk snapped. Working on your own? Or were you sent by the Seelie Court? The Unseelie Court? Mother turned her hand. She was holding the pills out toward me now. Take them. You can't be too careful. I grabbed them from her hand. Really? Over the counter like this? That's enough to protect you from them? We don't know enough about them to say for sure, she admitted. But it won't hurt, at least. I swallowed 2 pills. The answer is no, it won't help matters, Shannon answered. As for you, she turned her attention back to Hawk. First of all, I would have thought for a group fancying themselves experts, you would know by now that is a stupid human invention. The idea you can separate us into benevolent and malevolent. That was all a futile attempt to make sense out of something peasants couldn't comprehend. The change in her demeanor was eerie, to say the least. Shannon McCarthy had been quiet, reasonable, and soft-spoken. How much of that was her normal demeanor, and how much of it was the exhaustion of childbirth, I could not speak to. But this Fae wearing Shannon's skin like a suit sounded like her, looked like her, but there was a condescending lilt to her voice that, even in the short time I had known the older McCarthy sibling, felt utterly wrong. You're all malevolent, Hawk answered. No more than you are, the Fae answered. Now, where was I? Secondly, I would be very careful if I were you, considering I have quite the bargaining chip at the moment. Thirdly, she smiled. You really have no idea what you're dealing with, do you? She stood. She bowed to the 3 of us. Titania, wife of Oberon, queen of the fairies, and ruler of the Fae realm. She sat down again. At no point did Hawk have a shot that did not jeopardize CJ. My eyes widened. What I did next was entirely impulsive. Perhaps born of some innate feminine instinct. All I knew was that this was the most dangerous creature I had ever encountered. Rabin satyrs could not even begin to compare. And at the moment, she was holding a child. Stop! I ran forward and wrenched the baby from Titania's arms. As I did, I turned, hunching my shoulders and squeezing my eyes shut tight to shield the baby's body with my own, should anything happen. But nothing happened. Slowly, I opened my eyes, turning back to face Titania and walking backwards toward the far wall. Brave. Stupid. But brave, Titania remarked. She lifted her leg, crossing it over the other, hands grasping her ankle. You're lucky that I'm here to negotiate. Hawk had moved himself between us, but I could see past his arm. Are you Shannon? Or do you just look like Shannon? I asked. That's the question, isn't it? Can the Fae even take control of a mortal's body in such a manner? I guess you shouldn't try to hurt me then. She drew a very dirty look in Hawk's direction. Negotiate, Hawk repeated. I was comforted that he was keeping his gun on her. He was sweating, but his hand did not waver. That's right, negotiate. I have some things you want. You may have some things I want. There's potential here for something very lucrative, and you of all people should know that my contract will be fair. And very carefully worded, Hawk added, sounding entirely unconvinced. Very carefully, Titania agreed. Mother had migrated toward me during this exchange. She put a hand on my shoulder. Do not say a word, she whispered. She looked at Titania and raised her voice. We don't negotiate with Fae. I looked at her. Mother! She's right, Hawk said. We'd have to be idiots to make a deal with you. Is that so? Titania asked. You'd leave that darling child you have motherless. This poor family. So tragic. I'm sure you'd love to explain to the boy that he won't get his sister or his father back because you're above negotiating with the Fae. My breath hitched. You just said father, I said before I could stop myself. Killian is dead. Is he? Titania asked. She tapped a finger delicately against her chin. Are you sure of that? Hawk saw him. Her satyrs ate him. Oh, I'm not disputing that. Of all things, the thought made Titania giggle. Those vile creatures will eat anything. But what exactly did he see? My mother's eyes migrated, slowly, to Hawk. Agent, she said slowly, are you sure that McCarthy was dead when you found him? Hawk blinked. There was blood, he said. 2 of his fingers. Gore. A lot of gore. No way he could have survived that. By mortal means, Titania amended. Shut up! Hawk snapped. There was a knock on the door. Excuse me? Is there something going on here? Agent, your weapon, my mother hissed. Hawk holstered it just as the door opened, buttoning his coat to keep it hidden. The man standing in the doorway was wearing a security uniform. I heard some shouting, he said. Everything okay? Fine. I was just talking to my wife, Hawk stated. The security guard raised an eyebrow. And you two? He asked. Visiting hours are about up. If you're not immediate family, I'm going to have to ask you to... I don't know what you're talking about. The security guard looked at Titania. Excuse me? No one else is here, she stated. She looked almost bored, resting her chin on her hand while the security guard looked around the room. I held my breath. So did Hawk and my mother. But truthfully, I doubt he would have known we were there even if we had been screaming at the tops of our lungs. Oh. He scratched his head. My mistake. Don't know what I'm saying. Have a good night, ma'am. Thank you. I will. When he left, Titania rolled her eyes. She got up from the hospital bed. It's such a shame. Outside of my own realm, my magic is weakened considerably. She sighed. I can still do anything in regards to my own appearance. She gestured to her own body. But when it comes to obscuring the vision of you mortals, the less reliable it becomes. As you can imagine, I want to return as soon as possible. Agent Hawk, don't cause a scene, my mother said. She pinched the bridge of her nose between forefinger and thumb, brow furrowing as she watched Hawk's eyes following Titania like, well, a bird of prey. You want me to just let her go? He asked. She doesn't have the child. The sister isn't with her, and is probably not in the building, she said. What she said implied as much, and she's only changing her own appearance. We're in a very public area with civilians. It's not worth it at the moment. Oh, don't worry. I'll tell you exactly where I'm going if you want to find me, she said. I will be returning to the McCarthy household where I will be for exactly, she mimed looking at a watch, 12 or so hours. That should be more than enough time for you to decide that you three want to have a chat about things. What do you mean, us three? My mother said. I'm sure she was thinking what I was. Hawk was a detective. He was the one familiar with Fae cases. He was the one who should have been handling this. And after everything that happened, I was more than willing to let him do that. If you're going to try and make a move in chess, would you go in with only a knight? Titania gestured toward Hawk. Or would you want a knight, a queen, even a pawn? I grit my teeth. It was easy enough to know who was the queen and who was the pawn in her calculations. Finally, Titania did another sweeping bow. But of course, rule 1 of a good negotiation, always be willing to walk away. The door clicked shut softly behind her. We were all on edge. With tension high, I said the first thing that came to my head. Won't the hospital notice she didn't check out, but she went missing? I said. They both looked at me. I glanced away. I knew that was not the most important thing that needed to be addressed. But what else was I supposed to do? If she's never coming back, the hospital is the least of our problems, Hawk said. Do you think she was telling the truth, I asked? About Killian? A silly question, my mother said. The question isn't whether or not she's telling the truth, it's what she's not telling. She's right, Hawk answered. He uncapped his flask, taking a long gulp. Fairies don't follow our laws, but they do follow laws. They don't lie. What about what she just did, trying to pretend to be Shannon McCarthy? That's different. We're talking about contracts. Fae love their contracts, but a contract isn't binding with the Fae unless it's based on something true. It's like trying to build a house on air. There's no point even trying. Let's go. He was agitated. It was not like Hawk to look anything other than tired. Now his bloodshot eyes and heavy footsteps felt more like a symptom of anger than of exhaustion. Ryan. Mother caught up to him. She put a hand on his shoulder. Have you slept? When was the last time you rested? He blinked, slowly. Then he shook his head. I don't have time to sleep. Are we going to be able to just leave, I asked. I lowered my voice. CJ had by some miracle fallen asleep through all of this. We can't just take the child with us. Can we? Don't worry about that, Mother answered. Just be quiet, and if anything happens, I'll take the heat with the organization. We had made it to the parking lot. When we did, I looked at my mother. Mom, I said, are we going to go? She did not answer me at first. She had started to pace back and forth, only illuminated by the few outdoor lights. I had seen her like this before, when work was particularly stressful. This is what Hawk is familiar with, she said, half to us and half thinking to herself. Bringing you wouldn't make sense. It's dangerous. This is all too dangerous. We're not even supposed to be here. But she said she wouldn't even speak to him if we weren't there. Hawk, we're not just going to let Shannon be kidnapped. We can't. Hawk was drinking his coffee now like it was his last meal before death row. He took a gasp of breath and coughed, hitting his hand against his chest. His eyes narrowed. Doesn't this feel familiar, kid? He asked. Saying you just have to do something is what got you knee-deep in this to begin with. Control is right. You should go home. And you don't negotiate with Fae. Hawk was right. At least superficially, he was right. And yet, this is different, I said, shaking my head. I'm not coming because I think I can help. I'm not asking to do this because I think I'm the only one that knows what the right thing is. I don't expect to be able to save anyone. As I spoke, my eyes could not help but drift over to my mother. But no matter if I regret getting involved or not, I was, I said. And if Killian is alive, and Shannon, and the terms to get them back require me to be there, then I have to be there, whether I want to or not. I owe that to Liam, and I owe that to this child, Mother sighed. Stepping forward, she held out her arms. Give me the baby, she said. Mom, if we're going to do this, I'm the one with experience handling babies. You're doing this? Hawk asked. Control. You can't be serious. My daughter is right, she said. You did everything by the book, Hawk. Regardless of what we could or couldn't have done, this family has suffered. This has nothing to do with her. This is my call. We'll talk to her, and you, she turned her attention back to me, will stand behind us and you will not speak. You will not do anything. Do you understand? I nodded. I'm not promising anything, but we'll try. Okay? I nodded again. I did not want to push my luck by speaking. Good. And Hawk? We need to make a stop on our way back. On her timeline, that shouldn't be a problem. We had started walking again by this point. Hawk opened the car door. For what? Reinforcements? No, she answered, sighing as she got in. Formula. In spite of the time I had spent with the McCarthys, on their property and on their porch, I had not actually spent any time in their house. The colonial mansion's white exterior made it almost feel as though it was illuminated when we pulled into the driveway in the dead of night. CJ suckled on a bottle my mother had procured. "Here, honey," he said, handing the child off to me. "Agent Hawk, you and I are going to go in first to make sure this isn't some sort of ambush." "Sounds like a plan," Hawk agreed. We all got out of the car. Hawk looked back at me, walking toward me. He put his hands on my shoulders. "Listen," he said. "This is no joke. You need to listen to everything we say. You got that?" I swallowed. "Yes, I do." "You're sure?" "Air, you have to understand. The Fae are no joke. What you saw was nothing compared to what they can do to you. You see this?" He held up his flask. I nodded hesitantly. "Kid, why do you think I never sleep?" With that last statement to ruminate over, he turned away from me, grabbing his gun. "Come on, Control." "We'll call you in when we decide it's safe," my mother said. "Leave the baby in the car. The Fae won't steal what they think they can bargain for." They had a car seat already prepared for when Shannon would leave the hospital. I opened the car and strapped CJ into the car seat. When I turned around, they had already walked inside, and I waited. I waited for too long. There, standing against the side of the car, I weighed my options. I had a license, so I could simply leave. But then go where? And what if there was a good reason it was taking so much time? Was it even taking a lot of time, or was it my own nerves, stretching mere moments into minutes? Biting my knuckle, I finally made the decision to look. A quick peek inside the house, I reasoned, would at least let me know they were safe. I left CJ in the car. I did not think I would be gone for that long. The door was unlocked. "Hello?" The house opened into a foyer. The first thing I noticed was that my foot hit something as soon as I stepped inside. The second thing I noticed when I looked down was that it was a body. I gasped. "Hawk!" I tore my gaze away from him and scanned the rest of the room. Mother had managed to get just a few steps ahead of him, but she was on the ground too. I went to my knees and checked Hawk first. "If you are dead, I am going to be so angry," I said to myself, feeling for a pulse. I felt it, but I heard the voice at the same time. "My dear, relax. It's just a basic sleeping spell." I looked up. I was still kneeling. On the stairs, sitting with one leg crossed over the other, was Titania. She did not look like Shannon McCarthy anymore. Like the satyrs, the way she looked was both not unexpected, but I was wholly unprepared for how unnerving it would be in the flesh. The Fairy Queen had a bluish-green hue to her skin, her body draped with greenery, moss hanging around her shoulders like a mink stole flung over an eco-friendly professional attire. I could not tell if she was ready for the forest dance or a business meeting. Hugo Boss, but entirely organic. She was shorter than me when she stood up, hand resting feather-light on the banister of the large staircase. Not more than 5 feet tall, if that. "I was curious to see how long it would take you to come looking," she remarked. "But you left the child outside. Pity. But I suppose I hadn't asked you to bring him, did I? Wake my mother and Agent Hawk up. Now." I did not stay kneeling just to stay kneeling. I grabbed the gun that Agent Hawk had on his person. Maybe I had not been very good with a rifle, but I could handle a pistol. Titania, if anything, looked even less impressed than she had been at the hospital. "I am amazed by your tenacity, girl," she said. "You have an incredible knack for making stupid decisions. They did what you wanted. We're all here, so wake them up." I said I wanted you all here. I did not say I need you all to be conscious. She walked toward me. I backed up. She stopped when she was about halfway across the foyer. "Then I'm here," I said. "So what do you want?" "I told you what I wanted. You have something I want." "I'm not trading the child for his mother," I snapped. "Who said anything about the child?" "Then what is it you want?" "Training." I blinked. The gun even lowered to my side. "Training?" Titania waved a hand vaguely. "Most mortals are too incompetent to be of any use to me, long term," he explained. "The exception are those like you. Or, at least, who work for you. But they tend to be too smart to be put in a position to be useful." Her mouth spread into a smile. "That is, until you force their hands to getting dragged into this deeper than they needed to be." My head felt like it was getting squeezed into a vice. My thoughts were too jumbled together to be anything of use. The satyrs were one thing. They were creatures, like being attacked by a wild animal that was just a little smarter than the average feral dog or bear. You want a Paranormal Pinkerton's help," I said. Then what are you going to offer in return?" Titania tapped a finger against her lips. "What if I said I could give you 2 for the price of 1? Shannon and Killian? They're alive?" "To the best of my knowledge. And you can be the hero that saves Liam's sister and that old man of his." She tilted her head to the side curiously. "So, what will it be? A 3-on-1 conversation would have hardly been fair. I'd much rather talk to you." She stepped forward again. I did not move. She held out her hand. "Do we have a deal?" I had done a lot of stupid things up until that point, but even I was not stupid enough for that. I emptied the gun of every bullet in the chamber. Walking past her, I pressed it into her hand. In the corner of the foyer, there was a small nook where 2 armchairs and a table had been set. I sat down. "We can talk," I answered. "Let's make one."
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike International License. This episode was written by Mariel Marchetta and performed by the same. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Ken Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhosts, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.